It's all about the combo this time as we find out which manifold or header is best for your camshaft. Find out this time on Engine Masters. Here's a test that comes straight out of the mind of my co-host Steve Dulcich, who has told me for years that the smaller your camshaft, the less your exhaust headers matter. Well, we're gonna find out if that's true, and this is one of those episodes that is a complete over-deliver because you're gonna see other stuff as well. You're gonna see the difference between a small camshaft and a big camshaft, and you're gonna see the power of a cast iron exhaust manifold versus a shorty tube header versus a long tube header. So much in this episode of Engine Masters. Let me tell you how we're gonna do it. First of all, we're gonna use our venerable 383 stroker small block Chevrolet. Let me tell you about the specs on that baby. It's a blueprint engine short block. It is just basically a stroked 350. It's got a 750 stroke crankshaft in it. This thing is almost 10-to-1 compression. The cylinder heads on it these days are from Airflow Research, the Enforcer line, which is their lower buck series, and we found these to be the best of the cheaper small block cylinder heads that you can buy. Up top, we've got a smaller intake manifold than we typically run. This time, it's got the Performer EPS, a low-rise intake manifold. We got a 1-inch spacer on it, and the carburetor is a 650 CFM Holley XP. Now, how about the specific manifolds and headers we're going to be testing? First up is going to be the Summit Racing cast iron exhaust manifold that is sort of like an OE Chevy Ram's horn. The difference being, it does have the 2.5-inch outlet on it. Not all of the factory ones do. After that, we're gonna have a look at the Hedman tight tubes. These are block hugger headers, and they only have a 1 5/8-inch tube on them, and once again, a 2.5-inch outlet. Finally, the Dyno headers that we run all of the time, and we know that these actually make more power than a typical under chassis header. These have a 1 3/4-inch tube diameter and a 3-inch collector. Now, how are we gonna execute this test? What we're gonna do is run each of these exhaust systems with 2 separate camshafts. The first one is a Comp Cam's hydraulic roller that's itty bitty. It's from the line called the XR252HR. The duration at 50 thousandths tappet lift is, wait for it, 200 on the intake and 206 on the exhaust. That's really, really small. And then we're gonna step it up to the cam we're used to running in this engine, and it's wildly different. It's got 30 more degrees of duration on the intake. So it's 230 at 50 and 236 on the exhaust. That is a big swing in camshaft. So once again, you're gonna see those 2 power curves and you're gonna see all of these manifolds. But first, I'm gonna go ask Steve Dulcich directly, what is his theory about why a small camshaft would not require as good of an exhaust header? All right, Dulcich, cams versus exhaust. Explain your theory.
My theory?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, exhaust is an important aspect of making power, and people tend to think of it as a matter of restriction. And restriction is definitely a part of it, but I think the more important aspect is the scavenging you get with a header compared to a manifold. And the scavenging is going to depend on overlap to have an effective time window to do its thing. So my theory is with the big cam, the headers help a lot more than they do with a small cam. So if you have a little small cam motor, the header benefit is not as great as a big cam motor. So what do you think?
What he means by scavenging is, of course, the wavelength tuning of the header that is removing exhaust and drawing air and fuel in during overlap, which means the intake and exhaust valve are open at the same time, that point in the camshaft. And with the smaller cam, there's less overlap than with the bigger cam. Does that summarize it?
Well, it clarified it.
Okay, perfect. So if your theory is true, I think what we should see here is that a change from manifolds to headers will have a greater percentage of gain on the big cam than with the small cam. Is that how we're judging this?
I would say so, and when you say from manifolds to headers, I think the long tubes are definitely going to have a lot more dramatic of an impact than the short tubes, because I think that the length of the short tube doesn't lend itself to the reflected wave reaching the cylinder head during overlap.
Makes sense. I mean, basically, I threw the shorty headers in because I just wanted to know if they make more power than cast iron manifolds.
Yeah, that's the interesting point. I mean, historically, shorties have not been great performers.
Right.
But it'll be interesting to see if they're any better than this.
Yep, on 2 different camshafts. Right now, I guess it's just baseline with the cast iron. And actually, what we're gonna do here, I think we should just run the cast iron manifold, the shorty header, and the long tube, and then we'll come back and tell everybody what happened.
Yeah, I think the advantage to that is we might have a bigger picture of what everything kind of does instead of trying to beat it up one piece at a time.
Okay.
All right.
Give us a
Here we go.
baseline. And now the block hugger tubular headers.
We have the long tubes installed. Now it's going to come down to seeing how much power they make with the small cam in the engine.
Ta-da! Okay, Steve, first thing is, I don't know if we should get this thing a milk bone or take it for a walk. This is a pooch. This does not make power. The power numbers with the cast iron manifolds are 441.9 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM and a weak 347.9 horsepower at only 4,500 RPM. That is bad.
Yep.
Combination of bad cam, little itty bitty cam. I guess I shouldn't say it's bad.
No,
it's just
small.
tiny,
Yeah.
very tiny, 200 degrees of duration at 50 on the intake, and manifolds that I gotta hope are a restriction.
I would have to believe that there's somewhat of a restriction.
Yeah.
I hope.
That's really bad. My question though, and this is a big one, it's part of the reason I wanted to do this in the episode, is are the shorty block hugger tubular headers better than the cast iron manifolds? I really wanted the manifolds to work, but I don't think so. Let's see.
Oh.
This is more interesting than I thought. The black lines are with the manifolds and the red lines are with the shorty headers. So the little shorty headers actually were better everywhere power-wise. The peaks are 449 pound-feet of torque at 3,500 RPM, and the horsepower 357.4 at 4,800 RPM. We haven't seen this before with shorty headers.
No, not every time. I mean, I'm actually surprised that they actually perform pretty well. I've always kind of given them the nay, don't bother, but
Well,
this is decent.
It probably means that the manifolds are ungood. That would be my guess.
That might be too.
Yeah.
It's around 10 foot-pounds across the board. I'd say I'd average somewhere in there.
Except for right here, for some reason, they're really close, but
Yeah.
everywhere else, yeah. And I'm not gonna blanket say this is a test that applies every time, because there's different manifolds.
No, I was
that
going
could
to
be
say, I
different.
think you bring up a really good point. We don't know that absolutely that that's a great
We don't.
iron manifold.
And that manifold is aftermarket, but it does have the 2.5-inch collector, which is better than a factory one, which is usually 2 or 2 1/4. Yeah, so we don't really know, except we know these shorties are better than those manifolds.
Yeah, I mean, I'd probably head for a shorty now, I mean, at this point.
But head for the long tube, because then we're all gonna go, oh yeah. Now we're looking at our long tube headers. To clarify, the red lines here are the long tube. The blue lines are going to be the shorty headers, and the black lines are the cast iron manifolds. The power peaks with our long tubes, 454.8 pound-feet of torque at 3,700 RPM and 366 horsepower at 4,800 RPM. And it's interesting that the long tubes are better at every point above 3,200, but look, they actually take a dive right there versus the shorty headers.
You know, I have to say, for as long as I've been doing this, I don't think I've ever done this test with this small of a cam. So these are kind of interesting results to me.
Again.
No, this is actually pretty good stuff, though. I mean, it still says that headers are worth something.
They are. Sure. The gains, to me, are kind of incremental. I mean, the manifolds, and then, boom, you go to the shorties. It picked up some, and then it picked up almost an equivalent amount going to the long tubes.
No, I think what I learned here is that, surprisingly, long tubes are better with a tiny camshaft, which means the Dulcich theory to hold up has to show an even bigger difference at each step with the bigger cam.
And do we look at that in power numbers or
percentages?
I'm going percentage.
I would say percentage. Like I said, you're showing incremental gains with all of those different things. I mean, would you get greater incremental gains with a big cam?
That's what we need to know.
How do we find out, Freiberger?
We're gonna go install a bigger cam, and then we're gonna run all 3 exhaust systems again and see what happens.
Time for the shorty headers. Let's see what these do.
Okay, we got the shorties off, and we've got some real exhaust installed in it now. So we've got long tubes. We should get back to some sort of reasonable power level. This should be fun.
Now we've got data to share. With the cast iron manifolds in the big camshaft, the torque was 444.9 at 4,500 RPM, and the horsepower, 417.6 at 5,500 RPM. Hey, that is a massive difference between this and the small cam. You know, later on, I want to compare with long tubes, the small cam versus the big cam, just because we can. But right now, we're looking specifically at the exhaust. So let's overlay the shorty header and look at the difference there. Big difference again. The power with the shorty header that's tubular was 458.1 pound-feet of torque at 4,600 and 437 horsepower at 5,600. I think our belief is that the manifold is restrictive, and that's why it's showing this big of a gain.
Yeah, I think so. And you could almost hear it. It sounded like a plugged muffler, you know, when it would get up into higher engine speeds. There just, I don't think, is enough flow there for that kind of power this engine makes.
Yeah, that's a pretty significant gain from manifolds to shorties. That makes me go, I'm not a manifold guy. Steve and I were talking about this off camera. We're like, how can the manifold be that bad? And I think it's because the way it's designed, you got 2 cylinders going in each tube.
Yeah.
And so one cylinder is blowing out and presenting a flow restriction to the second one, depending on where the firing order is. I'd have to look at that, but it's gotta be why.
Yeah, it gets confusing. I mean, it's just kind of, it's so common. We see it in the boat manifolds, car manifolds. It's just something that you struggle with.
Yep. I like manifolds still because they're quiet, but hey, I'm old. Let's overlay the long tube header and see what kind of difference that made with the big camshaft. Interestingly, not as much of a change as it is between the manifold and the shorty.
I would have expected more there.
How weird. The peak power numbers with the long tube header in the big camshaft are 470.7 pound-feet of torque at 4,300 RPM, and the horsepower is 448.2 at 5,600. And I think we're at the point also where this intake manifold is restricting this camshaft.
I don't think there's any doubt. We've done combinations just identical to this with a Performer RPM air gap on it.
Yeah.
And the things are closer to 465 or so. This manifold is just designed for something different than a street Performer manifold. It's designed for lower engine speed.
You know what's really interesting that I noted with the small cam and our step through manifolds, shorties, and long tubes, the torque number didn't change that much.
As far as peak?
As far as the peak number, I mean, it went from 441 to 449 to 454, whereas with the big cam, it went from 444 to 458 to 470.
All the way to 470.
Wow. Yeah, so
That's
a much
big.
bigger change in the torque. But the thing that we must conclude out of all of this is that Steve's theory is correct.
Oh.
Yep. It makes a bigger difference to have headers on a larger cam than with a smaller cam. Here's the numbers. What we did is we took an average of the power range for each of these cams. And to be fair, it's a different power range for each camshaft. We went 2,800 to 5,500 with the small cam and 3,300 to 6,000 with the big cam. It's the same number of data points. But when you're looking at that average, with the small cam changing from the manifold to the shorty, we only saw a 1.9% change in torque and 2.1 on horsepower. But doing the exact same thing with the bigger cam, we saw an increase of 3.3 and 3.5%.
Yeah, it's a lot more.
Yeah.
So it makes, your conclusion is right. It makes much bigger difference to have headers with a larger cam than with a smaller cam.
And when we're talking 1 or 1.5% difference, that doesn't sound like much, but it is. It's a lot in this type of curve overall.
And the other thing that's interesting, though, is when we change to the long tubes from the shorties, the difference between the two isn't as much of a percentage gain, which you can see here.
And you know, I have to say that this is as good of long tube as you're gonna get.
Yeah.
You know, you do a chassis header or something, so that might even tighten up some with a chassis style header. I've been kind of not real fond of shorties forever, like don't bother, don't waste your time. But I mean, this is showing me a different kind of aspect of it, that maybe there's something there for guys who have ground clearance problems or that sort of thing.
There are applications for it for sure.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is, if you want what the engine's capable of delivering, there's only one choice.
Yeah.
The long tube for me.
It is, but I would say the blue line here, the shorty header, that's not an undrivable engine.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Yeah, it's pretty good. It could be better with a long tube, but on a Jeep, I'm not wanting to negotiate past the front axle and dragging the ground on a lower car and all those other things.
Exactly.
Yeah. Huh, interesting. All right, just because we can, we got to show the difference between the small cam and the big cam with the long tubes. Oof. As you may have derived by now, the black lines are the big cam and the red lines are the small cam. And if you've got a tow truck, go ahead and get that tiny camshaft, but if you're anybody else, I would put the bigger cam in the thing.
You know, I think this illustrates really well why we had to use different RPM ranges. There's two completely different applications. You just can't compare the same RPM range with two cams that are so radically different.
Let's conclude. I think still the manifolds are a great, tight-fitting application that's quiet. They don't break, they're cheap, they're easy.
They have their place.
But they suck. That's the problem. They don't make power. They also hold heat bad.
They do.
That's a big problem. As a matter of fact, when we change them on the dyno, we have to blow down the engine room for a long time just so we can handle that manifold.
Yeah.
And I guess my other conclusions are it's way easier to fit the shorty and the long tubes make the most power. And the final conclusion is The wise and all-knowing Engine Masters was correct once again.
One more time.
Yep.
Yeah.
You need to give me more ideas so we can do more shows where you're right.
Dave comes up with enough that he's right, so it's
Yeah,
only fair.
it's your turn.
Okay.
More Dulcich science coming up on future episodes of Engine Masters.
And now, the shorty headers.
Wow.
Okay, Steve, first thing is, I don't know if we should get this thing a milk bone or take it for a walk.
You now have something better than Clifford.
We have another engine, Clifford the big red dog. This is a pooch. This does not make power. It's
Does
junk.
what it's supposed to below 3,000.
I guess so. You've got an average cruiser, low buck, big block Chevy 454. Which intake manifold do you need? Well, we're gonna test them all and find out. It's another Engine Masters intake manifold shootout, this time for the big block Chevrolet with oval ports. This is gonna be sort of a real average cruising type of 454, where the dual plane manifolds that are more oriented towards the street will be like perfectly fit for this engine. I'm gonna tell you about all the manifolds. First, let me just run through what this engine is. It is a 454 bottom end, and it would be similar to something that you would have pulled out of like a 94 Chevy truck or something like that. It has very low compression. It has GM Performance Parts heads, which are Roval ports. Remember that the big block Chevy from the factory had basically 3 ports. There was the peanut port, which was oval and tiny. There's the large oval port, which is much larger and oval. And then there's the rectangle port. Then Edelbrock made something that we call a Roval, which is sort of a rectangle with very rounded edges. So that's the engine. It's only gonna make like 450 horsepower. Next, the manifolds. I went shopping and was surprised to discover there really aren't that many options, especially if you want a high rise for more power than average. Let's go over what we've got. First, there's the Edelbrock RPM air gap. As you know, this is the manifold we recommend for virtually everything that runs under 6,500 RPM on the street. Sort of our standard. By the way, this example of the RPM air gap is coated black. This one that's on the engine's actually the one we're gonna test. It's not gonna make a difference in power. Next, there's the Speedmaster intake, and I will tell you that to the naked eye, everything about the inside ports on this thing is identical to the Edelbrock RPM air gap. There's some differences on the outside, but I would expect these manifolds to perform the same. Let's get into the much lower rise intakes. First, the Edelbrock Performer 2 oval port. This one is the lowest height. It's also got the smallest ports of any of them, and I believe it's the oldest design of any of them. Moving up in height, we've got the Wyand Street Warrior, and then the Summit Racing intake, which is taller than either the Performer or the Street Warrior. And I mention that just because hood clearance might be an issue for you. A Corvette, like a Stingray, is a perfect application where you probably need a lower intake if you want to run a conventional stock hood. Also, for your information, the 2 Edelbrock manifolds are designed and cast and machined in the United States, and all the others are Chinese. So that's kind of the roundup. You know, we've learned that you can't glance at manifolds and really determine what they're going to do. But if you look at them, there is some interesting stuff. You can see that the Edelbrock Performer and the Wyand Street Warrior are the only 2 that are designed to accept a spread-bore carburetor like the Rochester Quadrajet that would have come factory on a lot of 454s. I think it's funny that the Wyand Street Warrior has a different waffle pattern on the floor on each side. I don't know, fuel distribution stuff. The Summit has a giant notch taken out of the middle of the plenum between the 2 planes. Who knows what that does? That's what we're here to find out. All right, let's talk to the Steves and then fire up our gutless 454 and find out which one of these intakes is best for you. All right, guys, we've ridiculed this engine in the past.
Stop.
What?
We're setting ground rules right now.
What's that?
Ooh.
We will not be calling it Clifford one more time.
Clifford,
This
the
is
big
now
red dog?
known as the Merc 7.4.
Well, my point was going to be, it's actually the perfect engine to test these intake manifolds.
It's designed for these intakes.
This is what I used to do, pulling a 454 out of a truck or like out of your Suburban, throwing some heads and a cam on it and go.
Yeah.
They make 480 to 500 depending on the compression and, you know.
Well, and this thing doesn't have much compression. These Mercury Marine
Yeah.
motors, they were like 7.8 to 1
I
from
know.
the factory.
Oh.
This has got a little smaller combustion chamber, so gosh, we might have even bumped it up to 8.2.
Yeah, but still, I think it's typical. It's a good way to throw together a cheap big block and have more power than a cheap small block.
Agreed.
And it's exactly the right thing for these intakes.
Yeah, agreed.
What's the first one we're testing here?
This is Speedmaster, not necessarily for any particular reason, except after sorting through and pre-fitting. We wanted to make sure we had everything fit, pre-fit, no gasket problems, interference, that sort of thing that we've run into in the past. So that just happened to be the one that we ended up with on last and figured we'd bolt it down.
Let's run the Speedmaster and see what our baseline power is.
Let's do it.
That is a dog.
I could hear that thing barking from here.
That is a dog. We're testing a bunch of intake manifolds on our 454 big block Chevy, and the very first one here is the Speedmaster, and it made 537.8 pound-feet of torque at 3,600 RPM and 465 horsepower at 6,000 RPM. The first thing we noticed is the massive spread, 2,400 RPM between peak torque and peak horsepower.
That's
Why?
actually a really good thing.
Well, I
could be.
guess, yeah.
Well, I mean, it's making peak horsepower at 6,000, but it's not making a lot of horsepower at 6,000 now, is it?
It doesn't make a lot of horsepower because it doesn't make a lot of torque either. And that's, in my opinion, because it's 8-to-1 compression. A typical 454 with 10-to-1 compression would be in the 565 to 575 range as far as torque. This is down at 537.
The horsepower, it seems kind of low for that tall of a RPM peak.
It's kind of 1 horsepower per cubic inch.
I guess so.
It's 8-to-1.
It is what it is, I guess.
Yeah, it doesn't mean that we can't compare the different intake manifolds, in my opinion. I think it's an application, like I said, where you would be running the dual
You know,
planes.
I can't tell you how many times we've taken truck motors, 454s, out of trucks, put them on the dyno and switched to a large oval port head or, you know, cam them up. Because you're limited on camshaft, too, because there is really no valve to piston clearance in these things. So you're very limited on cam. And they make kind of, you know, 460 to 500, depending on what you do with them.
Can you take the motor out of my Suburban and make it a 500 horsepower 454?
Yes,
you
I
would
can.
be thrilled with this in your
Oh,
Suburban.
I know.
You
I would.
absolutely would be. That is what it is. Let's go to the next manifold. Continuing with our 454 intake manifold shootout, we've tested the Speedmaster, and now we're going to the Edelbrock Performer 2.0 for oval port. Remember I was pointing out that manifolds don't always bolt right up? Check this out. The end rails are touching the engine block right here. That means even if I put some silicone in there, it's gonna leak, because see how the manifold just walks around like that? So on this particular intake, and this might not be true on your engine, by the way, it's just on this combo, we are going to have to stack gaskets. So the intake gaskets will be 120 thousandths thick, which you can actually buy in the aftermarket. You don't have to stack them, but that's what we're gonna do. Steve, do you mind gluing them in place? The next manifold that we tested is the Edelbrock Performer 2 oval port, and this is the intake that's designed for peanut port heads, and we think that's reflected in the power numbers here. The horsepower was 436.2 at 6,000 RPM, and the torque 532.5. So that's a big nosedive in horsepower versus the first intake. But surprisingly, the torque is the same, 532 versus 537.
Yeah, it's visibly a lot smaller intake manifold as far as cross-section and stuff.
And lower and everything else.
Yeah, it's all of it. I mean, I think it's designed more for truck general purpose kind of applications, not so much for what we're trying to do.
Let's show exactly how much you don't want to choose that for, you know, a roval port head or a big oval port.
Or this.
Yeah.
That's a big drop.
The red lines are the big high-rise intake with the larger ports in it, and the black lines are the low-rise Performer with peanut ports, and you can see the penalty you pay. It's the wrong manifold for the cylinder head.
Yeah, for this application at wide open throttle, it's just not the correct choice.
Yeah, it's not moving air. That's the problem.
Yeah, it diverges, it kind of says that, shows it.
But then again, it's 436 horsepower. I think it must have been designed on like a 396 or a 402. Actually, peanut ports didn't even come out till it was a 454.
No, and when you think about the truck applications, you're talking more like 330 horsepower, not even into the 400s.
Remember, they made 290 from the factory. That's what probably they were designed for.
Yeah.
The carbureted junk, they were hideously slow back in the day.
I had one, I know.
So were the TBIs.
They were also.
Right.
Yeah, but this is obviously designed way back in the era of a carbureted 454 motorhome. It's flanged for a quadrajet.
Yeah.
You know, it's not a performance intake. It's a...
And it's reflected in the power numbers.
Totally.
Yeah.
We got 3 more manifolds to go, and the next one's gonna be the Wyand Street Warrior.
The Wyand Street Warrior is almost fully installed, then we're in the dyno, firing this thing up and seeing the power it makes.
Manifold number 3 is gonna be the Wyand Street Warrior. Our next small port, low-rise intake was the Wyand Street Warrior, and honestly, it's got better numbers than the Performer 2 oval port. Still not what you would really want to see. 446.5 horsepower at 6,000 RPM and 535 pound-feet of torque. Once again, making the same torque way down here.
Yeah.
Right.
But then they just fall off. And I think we were talking more about that Performer and this as well, thinking in a truck, they never run past 4,000.
They don't. I mean, 4,400, if you leg it out, I mean, they're just not that kind of engine speed.
But nonetheless, compare it to the Performer. And the Wyand, which is a newer design, I believe, is way better. Wyand in the black lines and the Performer in the red lines. Bottom line, I wouldn't buy either one of these manifolds for this application.
No, not for this application, certainly not.
So far, the Speedmaster is still in the lead, but the air gap is still to come, and that's the standard by which we always judge these dual planes. But the next one we're gonna run is still small port, but bigger than these last two. It's sort of a tweener, and it's the Summit intake. Let's see if this thing fits. When we're fitting it, what we're looking for is bolt hole alignment on both sides and the gap right here at the end, which in this case is pretty good. All right, Steve, you want to slop it?
How much of a gap is there?
1/8 inch. Here's Here's the data for the Summit Racing dual plane. The horsepower 451.5 at 6,100, and the torque 518 at 3,500, which doesn't mean a lot till we compare it to the Wyand Street Warrior. I find the peaks are often deceptive, and it's normally what we just ran when we were magazine editors.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and before there was software where you could do graphs, everybody made that mistake of just looking at peaks, and that did not tell the whole story.
Oh, here's why you need to look at the whole thing. The Wyand is in red and the Summit is in black. The Summit picks up a little bit at the top end, but I'm not trading that for this meat in the torque curve, especially for an engine like this that would be in a lower end application.
No, absolutely, I agree with you.
Now,
Steve
David,
will take that.
well, I'm not too sure, but would you say that can be attributed partially, at least, to the way the center divider is cut way down?
The Wyand is cut way down. You think that's what's going on up here?
It helps it
Or down
on
here?
the top end.
Yeah.
It also can hurt it on the bottom end. It's like adding an open spacer.
Oh,
you know,
true.
we see it tilt the curve just by adding an open
And
spacer.
that's what we've got, is the tilted of the curve.
Yeah.
The Wyand is winning at every point below 4,700 RPM, and it's winning above 6,000 RPM.
The reality of it is this is really not a 6,500 RPM engine anyway. So I'm absolutely going to head for the Wyand.
Yeah, me too.
Versus the Summit manifold. I mean, it just spends so much more time down there.
Are you willing to concede?
I'll give it that, yeah.
Okay, normally Dulcich picks the highest horsepower regardless.
Okay, I'll go with the highest horsepower. That Summit is clearly superior up top, so that's the one I choose every time.
All right, here comes the Edelbrock air. Here are the peak power numbers for the Edelbrock RPM. The horsepower, 469.9 at 6,000. The torque, 540.3 at 3,500, which appears to be just a speck better than the Speedmaster.
What a surprise, an Edelbrock Performer RPM air gap doing well.
Once again.
It wins every single time. Let's look at the overlay to see if that's actually a true fact. The one that looks identical. All right, the black lines here are the air gap, and the red lines are the Speedmaster, and you can see that the Edelbrock is just a speck better.
Yeah.
And made in America.
Made in America. You did a lot of measuring, I saw over there, when between takes you had the calipers out and you were measuring port heights and widths and sizes and...
Well, the Performer is the smallest, followed by, I think, the Wyand or the Summit. Maybe those were the same. And, of course, the Speedmaster and the Edelbrock RPM were identical.
Appropriately sized for this cylinder head.
Yeah, seemingly. Yeah, you know what surprises me, I think, about this whole test is, aside from, you know, these last two high rises, there's not a good intake manifold for a 454.
Well, I mean, in this application, this is the standout, but the rest are just kind of, they're in there somewhere.
I think that they're for the application we were talking about earlier, where it never revs above 4,000 and it makes a little more torque down here.
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, let's look at the best of the low-rise intakes, which I think was the Wyand. This is going to be a comparison of the best torque from one of our low-rise intakes versus the air gap high-rise intake. So the red line is the air gap and the black line is the low rise, and there's no chance I'm ever choosing the low rise for.
No, you know,
It's better everywhere.
the Wyand compared well to the other low-rise intakes, but still comparing it to this, comparing it to this is still better from 3,000 all the way up.
It backs up the thing that I've tested and always said, which is the RPM makes more power than the low-rise intakes. I don't want to say always because I end up being wrong. Virtually always.
Yeah, I'll go with that.
I'll go with that.
You and I ran a stock-ish, I don't know, we ran a 224 at 50, 305 one time.
Yeah.
And we put the RPM on it, and it made more power than the baseline low-rise.
It seems to be the one every time.
Yeah, there's no reason not to run it on a mild engine even. I run into that a lot when people are asking me for advice, and they say, well, what intake manifold should I get for this engine? And it's just a mild combination. Put the air gap on it.
Yeah.
Or the RPM, which is a...
The difference would be hood clearance, like your Vet, for example.
Right.
Yeah,
Not when I put the L88 hood, I'll have clearance for the air gap.
You know, I would have almost expected to have one that was kind of a hot street application and one that was a truck application to see some tilt in the curve, and we just don't. We just see that this RPM, and ours is an air gap style, but we see where the RPM just is a really good manifold.
What do you say we never do a dual plane shootout again, and we just go the RPM is best?
No, we still have to test.
I guess so, but we've done it on what? Small block Chevy, big block Chevy, small block Ford, both 302 and 351, and 440 Chrysler.
Well, then we have 360 left.
360.
Mopar.
We haven't done, no, you've done small block Mopar, for sure.
Have we done it here?
Not on the Engine Master show, but we've done it for journalistic publications.
So the question is, how many
460s.
intakes are even available for a 360?
A lot.
Once again, are there? Really? Still?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe that's an idea for next time. Do you want to see it? More intake manifold shootouts? We've done a whole bunch of them, but there are more engines to go. 460 Ford, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, small block Mopar, going
Buick.
down the list. We never run out of ideas on Engine Masters.
That's a nice bead.
Yeah. Ooh, I'm shaking.
I know, how come?
It's,
And he got the skip jump spot.
I did. I'm having to pull pretty hard, so I'm shaking.
These ones.
Why are we even using the tops?
Why did Sir Edmund Hillary climb Mount Everest? Because it was there.
This is not Roco Garage. This is Engine Masters. This is a serious show.
What is oil viscosity? What does it do in your engine? Can it make power, and why? All of that this time on Engine Masters. Our new sponsor is Driven Oil, and they're letting me do something I've always wanted to do, which is a test of various viscosities of oil. They said, you know, we're not sure what you're gonna find out on the dyno, but hey, let's go for it. So what we're gonna do is look at a couple of different viscosities, and we're gonna do horsepower, we're gonna do temperature over pressure, and we're gonna compare the two viscosities to see if there's a difference in temperature over pressure, to sort of get an idea of the viscosity index being the oil's ability to maintain its viscosity over a broad range of temperatures. All right, this can get kind of complicated, and so let's go over some oil basics. First of all, what is viscosity? It is a measurement of a fluid's resistance to flow. A higher number is thicker, a lower number is thinner. So therefore, a 520 oil is thinner than a 2050 oil. The thing you need to understand, which I didn't and a lot of people don't, is that the viscosity test for the high number, for example, the 50 in 2050, is handled completely differently than the W number, the low number, the winter number. Here's what that's all about. Let's say you got a 2050 oil. The 50 is measured at 212 degrees. And to simplify it, they basically put it in a test tube with a metered orifice and they time how long it takes to flow out of the tube. That's how it's measured. But on the W number, the lower number, the 20 in 2050, it's totally different. That is a measurement of resistance to spinning. They take sort of a vane and put it in a bath of oil and spin it, and the lighter the oil, the faster it spins. Therefore, they can sort of extrapolate the oil that will flow best at the coldest temperature, and they kind of then adjust that to rate for an SAE viscosity rating. It's fairly complicated. The main thing that you need to know is that the W rating, the 20, is there because oil manufacturers wanted to be able to have a thinner oil on cold startup so that it gets all through the engine as quickly as possible. They just didn't want to have wear and tear on startup. there's a whole lot of other stuff in oil that is tuned for your specific application. Next, let's talk about this GP1, which they recommend is like their ultimate hot rod oil. The GP1 is a semi-synthetic, and they admitted to me that, you know, the way the oil industry works, it can have a very, very low percentage of synthetic in it to be called a semi-synthetic. Apparently, the thing about the GP1 here is that it's good for hot rods because it has the potential to make power because of the additives in it. And it's really good for fuel contamination, like if you're running methanol, or if you're running E85, or if you, like us, run your gasoline car way too rich, and you get a bunch of fuel in the oil. They've got additives that prevent that fuel from breaking down the oil and causing it to be thinner. It will stay thicker longer with contaminants in it. In the hot rodding world, a big one is main bearing and rod bearing clearance. Let's say you've got 3,000ths rod bearing clearance, which is fairly big, and you're doing that because you've got like a supercharged application. Another application could be really, really tight, like perhaps a new LS that is 1.8 thousandths. And the thing is, you need a viscosity of oil that matches what that clearance is. Thinner for a tighter clearance, thicker for a bigger clearance. That's one of the main things, because you want to maintain what's called a hydrodynamic wedge, which is the lubrication that is between the crankshaft journal and the bearing to separate the two of them so they don't touch and so they don't shear the oil. Wow. That's a lot of stuff, and honestly, it's real basic because there's a lot more to it. Now, the two oils that we're gonna be testing here are a 5W20 and a 20W50. I wanna find out, does one make more horsepower than the other? But what's really interesting is looking at the different temperatures you can run at. Remember how the high end of the SAE rating is based on 212 degrees? We're gonna run these oils at 212 degrees, but we're also gonna run them down at 100 degrees. And what I wanna look at is how pressure and power changes when you have different temperatures. But the other thing to do is to compare the two oils to see if one of them diverges and has a bigger problem maintaining that viscosity index than the other one. So that's the oil test. What's the engine we're gonna use? Honestly, it's kind of a weak Chevy 454 big block. The bottom end is a Mercury Marine crate engine. It's got like 7.5 or 8 to 1, and that's the problem with it making big power. We're guessing that the camshaft in it, based on the power curve, probably has 224 duration at 50,000 tappet lift. It's probably a CompCam's XR276HR hydraulic roller. It's got the GM Performance cylinder heads on it, which were made by Edelbrock, and the intake manifold is an Edelbrock RPM air gap. Up top, we have a 750 Holly on there, and it's got a product that isn't available anymore, which is Percy's jet plate. So you can just turn a screw and adjust the jetting. So that's what the engine's all about. Now I'm gonna sit down with the Steves, and then we'll have a little bit of a discussion and start to make noise and see if there's really a difference between different viscosities of a really good quality oil. We don't even know what we don't know. We're gonna find out as we go.
Isn't that normally the case?
I guess so.
This time more than ever, maybe. Because,
totally.
yeah, this kind of information you just can't come by that easily.
Now,
You know, this is one of those tests to me that sounds so easy, but the more you think about it and the more you figure out how to get it done, it becomes really complex.
well, that's gonna be on you, because the big thing
thanks.
is, well, it is, is gonna be the control of oil temperature and water temperature. And the reason for that is the water temperature affects horsepower. And if we're trying to look at different horsepower between two oils, then we need the water temperature the same, but we also need the oil temperature the same. So that's gonna be hard, but you can do it. I think what we're gonna do is start with our thinnest oil, go to the thickest one. So the first one going in is going to be the 5W20 driven GP1. I'm in the control room here with Steve because we're keeping an eagle eye on these two fields right here, which is oil temperature and coolant out. We really need to keep that stuff repeatable, which is difficult. And so we're gonna kind of look at this first test and agree on where we should start pulling the engine. based on what we think we can duplicate with the other oils?
Yeah, you know, it's not unusual at all when we're testing this stuff that we kind of figure out some of our test procedures during the first set of testing. That way we know that we can duplicate it through each of the tests and be accurate so we can compare back to back.
So now what we're gonna do is heat up the oil by running it at about 3,500 RPM under a fairly big load. And then we'll try and cool the coolant temp back down and run it again. At 225, you'll see this frame turn red. There we go. Right, now we shut it down and wait for the coolant to cool, and hopefully the oil stays fairly hot. As a reminder, this is with the Driven 520 oil, and I'm gonna start by giving you what's actually the least important data at this point, which is the horsepower and the torque. The torque is 541.4 at 3,500 RPM, and we made 468.8 horsepower at 6,000. But before we have another oil to compare that with, really, I think the story is in the oil pressure.
Yeah, I think so too.
Here's our oil pressure curve cold with a peak of 66.9 PSI and a nice curve. We
Beautiful
got
curve.
no windage garbage or anything like that happening up at the top. If we have a windage problem, we often see the pressure just, you know, do this and then
Yeah,
up at the
it gets
top
ugly.
end. How about hot? Our peak with hot oil is 53 PSI. You can see that the hot oil has lower oil pressure everywhere because it gets thinner. And what's interesting is that hot oil is honestly where the spec is for the 50 weight, because it's at 212 degrees, which is what we ran it at.
Yes.
So that's right at that number. The question is, does the hotter oil make more horsepower? So now we go back to the power curve and compare those two things. Pretty good. The black lines are the cold oil, which was about 100 degrees, and then the red lines are 212 degrees. And you can see that the hotter oil makes a little bit more power, as we've seen time and again. It's no mystery.
You know, ask any drag racer. Hot oil, cold water, that's how it's gonna make the best power.
With the hot oil, our peaks are higher. The torque is 544.7, also at 3,500 RPM, just like it was before. And the horsepower, 472.4 at 6,000 RPM. So yeah, up a few numbers everywhere. The thing I'm really curious about, though, is what happens when we pour the thicker oil in. If we see any difference or, you know, trends that are not the same as far as how quickly it gets hot, what the difference is in pressure, all those things.
I'm curious too, because I can't tell you how many times a drag racer will opt for a thinner oil because he can't heat it up like we did. So instead of a standard oil that's got 212 degrees, he's gonna go to a 0 or 10 weight oil at 100 degrees, and it's gonna have the same sort of viscosity, looking for that power.
What's interesting is I was speaking to Bill at Driven Oil about exactly that, and he was working with the guys who run in the NMRA, where it's Coyote stock. It's ostensibly a stock engine, they drag race them. He said a bunch of the people were running that 0 weight oil, but they were actually losing ring seal. And what they would do is they would pour in an additive that would make more power, and they go, hey, I make more power. And he's like, well, you could have just run the thicker oil to begin with. So it's not always about the thinnest oil to make the most power.
It's not. It really is a combination. I mean, when you look at the higher levels in drag racing, comp eliminator, pro stock, those sorts of things, the ring technology is way out there. I mean, they're like 1.2 millimeters. Pro stock stuff is even as thin as 28 thousandths. They're gas ported. You know, ring seal they've really gone to a lot of extremes to get great ring seal. So they're able to get away with that. A regular stock eliminator car, not so sure that that's beneficial to start running 0 or 10 weight oil.
Interesting. So the next test is going to be with thicker oil, and I hope that we can derive things about whether the thicker oil is hotter at the same coolant temp than this is, because that's what the theory is, but that's not what your real world experience shows.
Going back to what you said before, one of my fears is running a really thin oil under a high load situation, like a lot of power, a lot of pressure on that contact interface can, squish that really thin oil out, especially when it's very hot.
The hydrodynamic wedge, that's why you want a thicker oil with a larger bearing journal clearance, and also why guys with superchargers tend to run heavier viscosity, so you're not displacing
the ultimate example there would be a top fuel motor.
70 weight straight is what they run in top fuel engine.
But I'm going to be curious, when we put the heavier weight oil in the engine, I mean, how much of a penalty are we really talking about in power, if any?
Well, you can go burn your hands and drain it out, and I'll go ahead and pour the new stuff in.
And then I'll find out.
Let's change the filter too, that makes sense.
I'll take a nap.
Yeah, okay. All right, changing oil for power and pressure. There's our cold oil run, just to observe. It looks like the oil went from 100 degrees to about 119 on that pull. Now our chore is to get the oil up above 212, like 225 degrees, shut it off, and cool the coolant back down to 125. There's 225.
Or 225.
Yeah, it took longer, and it took a hotter coolant temperature to get there. This will be interesting. Let's go sit down with Dulcich and discuss. First up, we've got the 2050 cold. The peak numbers here are 539.2 pound-feet of torque and 464.4 horsepower. But now we're going to overlay it with the same oil run at a higher temperature. And after looking at the last test with the thinner oil, this shouldn't surprise you too much. Sure enough, the hot oil makes more power, to the tune of 548.5 pound-feet of torque and 478.5 horsepower. That's big.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah, I like it a lot. Now what we're looking at is oil pressure, cold versus hot with the 2050. So the peak oil pressure when it was cold was 73 PSI, and the peak when it was hot was 60 PSI. Once again, the hotter oil gets thinner.
Thinner, sure.
Right, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not 50 weight when it's hot. That's the thing that I think is sort of a mind boggler. We ran it at 212 degrees. That's where oil is rated, so that's where it's a 50 weight, not out of the bottle, not cold out of the bottle.
I got you.
Right,
Okay.
pore viscosity is different.
No.
Yes,
How does
no?
that compare to the thin oil is what I'd like to know.
Let's have a look. And what we're looking for here is to see if the viscosity index is different between the two oils. The black lines are 2050 cold. The red lines are 2050 hot. The green lines are 520 cold, and the blue lines are 520 hot. And it looks to me like the gap is about the same.
Pretty similar.
Yeah,
I remember it was 14 and change pressure differential on the thin oil and 13 and a tiny bit on the thick oil. So.
And of course, the reason that the thinner oil's lower pressure is just because it's thinner to begin with.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right, so I don't think that's very instructive. That's not really teaching us that there's any big breakdown based on temperature between these two oils.
No, it's just kind of what you would expect as things heat up. Thinner is going to have less pressure, thicker is going to have more.
And the thin oil versus the thick oil didn't do anything differently.
No.
That's what we're deriving from that. The last thing that we should look at is the temperature gain between the two, which I'm going to assume is going to be the same because the pressure was the same, right?
That would follow, yeah.
Our next graph is showing us if one of the oils gets hotter during a dyno pull than the other. And by the way, the scale here, from here to here, is 1 degree. Yeah. So it might look drastic, but it's not. It's 1 degree. The red line is the 520, the thinner oil. The black line is the 2050, the thicker oil. And basically, wherever it starts dictates where it finishes. Yeah. That's what this gap is.
And it kind of train tracks. It's the spread is the same basically throughout the run. It's 1 or 2 degrees difference throughout.
Yeah.
I don't see any significant change or variation on how fast it's heating up.
Not at all. And maybe we're just dealing in a range where both of these have a viscosity index good enough that they just don't care. We don't know.
There's a lot of data here, more than I thought we really had initially. And, you know, not a surprise, we always learn more as we go, but there's a lot to sift through here as far as what's happening and what's going on and why.
But wait, the most interesting thing is coming up right now. All the rest of this is just stuff that doesn't affect your life. The next one makes Dulcich and I really, really happy.
Ta-da.
And there's the myth buster that is going to change your world. The red lines that made more power are the thicker oil. That's the 2050. The thinner oil made less power.
Right.
Because most people think you pour in really thin oil because then there's less resistance to pumping, there's less windage loss, you know, less frictional loss, all that stuff.
All of those things are correct.
But
that's not the story.
It is overcome by the fact that the thicker oil contributes more to ring seal. All right, let's conclude. I think the first thing I've got to do is walk back my enthusiasm for the 2050 because honestly, the whole ring seal theory and the more power, the thicker oil is unusual at best. Like the guy at Driven told me, thinner oil will always make more power up to the point of it compromising ring seal.
Yeah.
And we've seen that in plenty of testing. Thinner oil makes more power.
Yeah, over and over again. This engine may be a little bit unusual. You know, it's got wider rings, a ton of laps on it. And in this case, maybe this is a bit unusual just because it did help ring seal. That's the only explanation for that divergence in the curve.
It still opens up a subject I had never considered. I didn't know that oil could contribute to ring seal.
And by a pretty dramatic margin when you look at the horsepower gain up at the top.
Yeah. So that's my big takeaway from the episode is that it has that potential, but it doesn't mean it's going to happen every time. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to happen in rare occasions. The other thing I think we have to admit here is that through all our struggle to look at temperature over pressure and viscosity index and everything else, I think honestly the dyno doesn't have the capability to push the oil to the point where we can really conclude on that.
Oil testing becomes a huge volume of information. I mean, this is only just a piece of it. You know, when you look at the lab testing, you know, we've done oil testing in the past where it goes to the lab, it goes to the dyno, it goes to the race team, and then makes that circle 2 or 3 or 4 times before they actually settle on a blend that everyone is happy with. So it goes on and on. There's a lot of depth to it.
So I think more talking and thinking than hard data here. An unusual result with the power. I learn something every time, and this was one of them. Ring seal from oil.
Once again.
Yep. Maybe we can dig up more freakish power gains. That's kind of what we do on future episodes of Engine Masters. This episode of Engine Masters is just simple and fun. It is an air filter element shootout. This time we're gonna find out which color air filter element makes the most power. Not really, but kinda, because man, you can see they come in a variety of colors and styles. There are so many air filter elements available on the market these days. I just want to do a quick shootout to find out if there's really any differences in any of them. So you're gonna get two things. You're going to get paper elements versus cotton elements, oiled elements, and then you're also gonna get a brand to brand shootout. So I bought everything that I could that appeared to be different that was in stock at summitracing.com at the time we did this show, which is June 2023. I brought my crib notes because I wanted to give you what all these are and what the prices are of them, starting from cheapest to most expensive. First, we're gonna test an All-Star Performance paper filter. That one is $12.99. Mr. Gasket paper filter, $15.72. Then Summit has their own line of air filters, and now we get into the cotton gauze oiled air filters. These are available in blue, black, or red. Strangely enough, red is $34.99, and you can get the other colors for $26.99. I don't think there's a difference in performance, it's just the colors. Next up, we have one from Spectre Performance. This is $31.99, available in red or black. I got the black, which I thought was pretty cool. Edelbrock sells one that's called the Pro Flow in blue, black, or red. That's $34.95. Then we get into the green filter. That's actually the name of the company that sells them. It's not just the color. The green filter is $58.42, and then the K&N is $77.99 on sale at the time we're shooting this. They're normally $89.99. Now, as we test these, one thing we cannot do is judge the value of the filtration on any of these. We don't have a way to contaminate them uniformly, and we don't have a way to sort of analyze what particles are being passed through them. So this ain't that. This is going to be a power test, but I can also sort of give you some observations on each one of these. The two paper filters, I really wanted to get a super cheap one that hardly has any pleats on it, and I couldn't find that. And so the All-Star and the Mr. Gasket are extremely similar, though clearly not made by the same company. They're not the same exact thing. The thing I'm talking about on pleats is air filters can often be judged on how many folds they have, you know, per inch or all the way around the thing. If they have very few folds, that means there's much less surface area on the filter, and that's gonna tend to mean that it won't pass as much air and that it won't catch as much dirt and stay cleaner and useful as long as if you have a whole bunch of folds, but I couldn't find a super cheapie. So that's just a little bit of information that applies to both paper filters and the cotton gauze. Other observations that I've got to get into are that the only two here that are made in the United States are the green filter and the K&N filter. Now, I got to lead with K&N because this is the company that actually popularized high-performance cotton gauze air filters. They did it way back in 1969. They really invented this marketplace, at least as far as I know. And that product, while it is the most expensive, I will tell you sort of just based on intuition and handling it and fondling it, it's the highest quality unit here. It fits better, the folds are more consistent, the way the wire is like embedded in, it seems more solid, it's a little bit heavier, so that is the nicest unit. The other one made in the United States is the green filter. Here's the thing about that. I took the green filter, and I took all of these actually, and held them up to the light and looked through them. That green filter, you can see a lot of light through the thing. You can actually see some voids in it. And I'm like, what is going on with that? And I wondered to myself, how can this filter anything compared with these other guys? And I read up on their flyer, and here's the deal. They say that they use less cotton layers in their filter than, for example, the K&N. And they say that their oil magnetically charges the screen so that it can catch negatively charged dust particles. I suppose the cotton is there then to catch the positively charged dust particles. There's no way we have to verify all of that. However, the company's marketing does explain why that one seems to be more see-through than the others. What we're gonna do is throw all of these on one engine and just test them, and essentially we're gonna look at horsepower and find out what the airflow is on them. What engine are we gonna use? My 408 LS. Super simple. All we're really using it for on this episode is to suck air and find out which filter is best. Okay, guys, ready for the least ambitious episode of all time? Yeah, this is gonna be simple and easy, but when I came up with the idea, you're like, dude, people ask the question all the time, so here we are.
No, I like our discussion. You know, I mean, some of the most basic things really are what guys are the most interested in.
No, I wanna know too, and I think we learn something every single time, but I do wanna add a little bit something other than just air filter elements. I think we should still test it just with an open carburetor. In the past, we've seen that it loses power with a dropped base. I think we should run through that again.
I think we saw that with a drop base with an element. I wonder about just a drop base.
That's true. We could run just a flat base, just a drop base,
Yeah.
and then start
there's
putting
something there.
filters on it after that.
Yeah.
However,
Oh boy, money time.
we're not gonna see a difference of more than just a dyno variance of 2 or 3 horsepower with any of the filters, including the paper. What?
Ooh, I'll take you on that.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You will?
Oh, you betcha.
Okay.
No, I'm actually going to go with you and bump Dulcich another 20.
Okay.
I'm in. There's going to be more than 1 horsepower difference between
That's
them.
not what I said. I
Dyno
said
variation.
variances. So
Dyno
do we call that
variances.
2 or do we call that 3? 3.
3? Get out of here, Brule. 3?
We can't just look at peaks either. We're gonna have to look at the average. We're gonna have to agree that it made no difference.
All right, I'm going all in.
So we have a friendly bet on the table about what's gonna happen with the air filter elements, but first we're gonna fire it up and run it with no air filter on it at all, and then we're gonna probably fiddle around with some bases, and then we'll get into the elements. Steve, let's see our baseline. On the open carburetor, nothing modifying it at all. We saw 508.6 pound-feet of torque and 541.3 horsepower. So let's run out there and we'll test both the flat base and the drop base, and then we'll come talk about what happened.
Perfect.
Our first test with no filter and just a base is with the dropped base. And now the flat base on the carburetor. Steve's about to pull up the test with the dropped base on it so we can compare it to what we saw with nothing. Whoa.
That's a lot.
The comparison here is the black line is with no base on it, and then we put the dropped air filter base, and look at the power it picked up. It made 5 horsepower up top. I bet you the flat base does the exact same thing.
You're talking one.
Yeah, the flat base does the exact same thing. It is 1 horsepower difference. We're not counting that. So legitimately putting some sort of air transition into the carburetor helps.
It helps.
Which we've seen many, many, many times. I just didn't
surprise.
expect 5 horsepower all the way up top.
Well, the reason I thought it was kind of cool to put a base on it is because you see so many guys at the track, if they're drag racing, they'll take the filter off. But I see some guys with no base and some guys with a base, and I think it's important. One is to kind of keep the engine temperature away from the air
a big
inlet,
one.
and then to contour it as well.
And also the reason why it makes 5 horsepower up there and not down here is simply airflow demand.
At
It
a much
makes bigger
higher speed,
difference.
so that contour makes a bigger difference.
Yeah. When we do our filter testing, which base do you want to use?
I want to use the flat one.
Yeah. We'll test it all with flat, and then I think at the end I want to go in and test with a filter, the flat and the dropped.
I think that's a good idea.
Now we're gonna start testing filters, and we're gonna run in there and test our 2 paper element air filters, and then we'll come back and pick a winner on that, if any.
Our first test is going to be the All-Star Performance 14 by 3-inch paper element. That's the cheapest filter in the test. I'm going to add this paper gasket. You'd be surprised how much dirt can get right between this edge and the carburetor air horn. And all set, ready for testing.
Now the basic paper element from Mr. Gasket. What's on the screen right now is the power with a flat base, but no filter on it at all. So let's see how much power a paper air filter element kills. Black lines is no filter, red lines is with a filter, so that you can see that you do lose some grunt everywhere in the curve by adding that paper filter.
Pretty significant from top to bottom.
How did the Mr. Gasket do? Now we're looking at a comparison of these two paper filters. The red lines here are going to be the Mr. Gasket. The black is the All-Star. They're the same. Those two paper filters really are identical. I think the worst part of all of this to me is that I couldn't get a Fram filter. That's the one that I always used when I was a kid because I wanted that orange rubber on there.
That orange rubber was
That was the key.
Yeah.
Yeah. So honestly, I think most of these paper filters that have a pleat count like this are going to do that. The next thing that we're going to test is all of the oiled cotton gauze air filters. And I think I want to run those maybe in order of price. Does that sound right? So I think the first one up is going to be the Summit. We're into our air filter element shootout. We've already seen that our paper filters kill a little bit of power versus no filter at all, but now we're looking at our aftermarket oiled cotton air filters. First one up is going to be the Summit brand oiled cotton gauze air filter element. And the cool black looking filter element is from Spectre. Next up is the Edelbrock ProFlow. Can you guess which filter this is? It's the green one. And our last filter, the biggest name in the aftermarket, K&N. We just came back from testing a whole bunch of oiled cotton gauze air filter elements, 5 to be exact, and we've pulled up the power curves of all of them right here on the screen. And as you can see, they're all pretty much the same, but there are differences. So on a zoom in, that's the difference right there. It's interesting. You can actually see they're fairly well grouped together except for the green filter, which happens to be the green lines, actually is up ahead, but it's by a really minute amount. So among all of the oiled elements, the difference in peak torque is 1 pound-foot. And then the difference in peak horsepower, 2.8. Then the average, meaning the average from the whole range of RPM, 2.1 on torque and 2 horsepower. So that's, that's the difference that we're looking at.
Amongst these brands,
amongst all of these filters. So while this looks like it's standing out right here, if you look at the scale, at best, it's 2.8 horsepower. So we established that I believe that all of our oiled filters are essentially the same, although the green was just a speck better by a horsepower or 2. So what we're gonna compare here is that green filter that was the best of those to the worst of our paper filters. And I might add that by worst, I mean by 0.6 horsepower. And so that is going to be the All-Star paper filter in the black lines and the green filter in the red lines. So you can see, in fact, the difference between a paper filter and the oiled filter can be significant enough that we need to do this. Although I misspoke at the top of the show because what I meant to say is all of the oiled filters are the same. And what I said was all the filters are the same.
Thanks, you just lost 40 of my dollars.
I did. Yeah, I know.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, you won because the ultimate gap here, remember we said that we would go within 3 horsepower? Well, at peak horsepower, the difference here is 4.4. And at peak torque, it's 2.7. I still would think that we would see it closer here and further apart up there.
Well, and we are as far as, if you look at the power curve, it kind of it does do that.
Well, regardless, I think we know that the paper filter doesn't make as much power as the oiled filters, but I think we also assume that the paper filter filters more.
Yeah, looking at those two filters, you cannot see through one of them.
Yeah.
The other one, you can look right through it.
Well, the other consideration on these, though, is how much dirt can they hold before they start to degrade performance? That's one of the claims to fame of, like, I think K&N initiated that entire concept. And the other thing that Steve and I have dealt with before on Roadkill and Roadkill Garage is driving through a massive puddle, driving in the rain with your paper filter.
You get a paper filter wet and it won't let any air through it. As a matter of fact, you'll just suck it right into the can.
The next thing is I really want to try the drop base versus the flat base. Which element do you want to do that with?
The green.
Do we want to, though?
Oh, yeah.
You do?
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
Because it was the best one?
Yes.
I think that's fair.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now we're starting our last test. First up is going to be the green air filter with a flat base, and then we're going to change it over to the dropped base and see what happens. And now the drop base. This time, we really didn't see anything. There's one little glitch on one data point where the drop base actually made a little more power, but all throughout the curve, nothing this time.
I wonder if part of that has to do with the demand, too. I wonder if this might show different results on an 850 horsepower engine where there's a lot more demand and you've restricted that area.
And I'm not sure if we tested it earlier on a carburetor with a choke horn.
Yeah.
Because the choke horn
Right.
sticking up off the
Good
top of the
point.
primaries is going to get way closer.
That's a really good point. And if we did that, then there's almost no room there. I've measured that. I've seen it. It's like it shuts it down to almost nothing. The drop base is actually always kind of, in my experience, showed to be kind of a nice contour and entry into the top of the carburetor. So.
Well, and while picking at minutia, to be fair, this green filter made the most power. I mean, it made more power than no filter at all. It might be making the airflow a little bit more linear through there.
We're just using that at this point because it doesn't seem to be at all restrictive. It's a spacer
Right.
between the bottom and the top. So we've still got basically an open bottom that's contoured.
All right, I am prepared with conclusions for this entire episode. The first thing is there's nothing here that we can declare at all about filtration quality on any of this.
No.
Yeah, so just to reiterate that. The other thing is all of the testing you've seen here is going to apply at this power level. It's not going to matter if you've got a 283 running 10,000 RPM making 500 horsepower, or if you've got a 540 that somehow only makes 540 horsepower.
It's about the
It's
airflow.
going to be about the same.
Not seeing huge differences, I would say that anything from this power level down is fine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But if you are dealing, as you said, with 850 horsepower, these things are going to start to be more of an issue. I think what we saw with these filters all being virtually the same, I mean, within 4.5 horsepower, which earned him $100, that there was nowhere to go at all. Because when we ran no filter and then added the paper and it only killed 5, well, it's not like the other ones were going to be able to add 20.
No, small gains and losses.
Not necessarily in order. I think we just found out that not in all applications does it matter whether you have a drop base or a flat base. And earlier than today, I would have said, oh yeah, we tested it. Flat bases can kill power.
And it's also going to depend on the top.
The other thing is what we've seen, I'm going to say every time, is that some sort of a base or plate or velocity stack is always better than an open carburetor.
Yes.
It just smooths that transition at the edge.
Yeah.
I think we learned that paper, as far as we have seen, let's say it tends to kill power versus no filter at all. And that the oiled filters tend to make more power than the paper filters.
By a little bit.
In this case, it could be bigger in different applications. I think we can also say the two papers that we tested made the same power. I really wanted to find one of those papers with like no pleats in it that had almost no surface area. It might have made the same power, but it would have clogged much faster.
Yes.
The oiled filters that we tested, they were really all the same except for this green one, which made another couple horsepower. And maybe there's a reason for that. Looking through it and reading their brochure and watching the power, it's like, okay, I don't know if it filters anything, but it did move more air.
Yeah, that was a kind of an interesting explanation on how it actually filters. But it's not because of layers of material. It's some other magic that's going on there with positive and
Ionic
negative
bonds,
ions.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I think that's about it, other than the pros and cons of oil versus dry, which is oiled filters cost a lot more, but
A lot more one time.
you can wash them essentially forever.
Yeah.
If you're a guy willing to do that.
Are you?
No.
Neither am I.
I end up not having time, and one time I did it years ago, I made a mess of it. If I get a car that has an oiled filter in it and it's a caked up mess, as my junk tends to be, I throw it away.
I'm willing to wash them.
Yeah.
And it's not so much even having to re-oil them and spend all that extra time. I'm just willing to wash them. As I'd mentioned earlier to you, I even have a K&N filter in my heating and AC unit because I take it out and I go wash it off and put it back in.
Yeah.
And I bought one filter and now it's been there for, 8 or 10 years.
And you're not throwing away as much junk.
And honestly, I don't want to sound like Mr. Greenpeace, but that's truly,
it is.
I felt bad about throwing away just garbage and, because I was changing that filter once a month. And so now it's one time and I'm done.
Well, that turned into a lot more conversation and thought over something that I thought was going to be just a totally brain-dead test. I hope you picked up something from it because we learn something every single time we do this show that's called Engine Masters. Okay.
Oh, well.
I love guys like this, where you just go, no, we're gonna really bet now. We're not just gonna wand things around. And all of a sudden, have you ever noticed that same sound in their throat when they start to choke?
I'm good for it, guys. All I have are hundreds in my wallet.
It's okay, I've got change.
Your valve springs and push rods could be costing you power and reliability, and you wouldn't even know it. Find out why this time on Engine Masters. This episode could answer questions that you didn't even know that you had. Here's the situation. In a pushrod engine, can pushrods and valve springs affect power even in a situation where you don't have a valve float problem? That's what we're gonna find out. Here's the thing. Let's just look at the valve springs. If you put a really heavy, beefy race-type valve spring in an engine, perhaps you've put a breaker bar in the front, you've turned it over, and you're like, man, this takes a lot of power to rotate this engine. Does that mean that it kills power if you're running the engine with a stiffer spring? It must, because it takes, more work to turn it over. Second thing, you know that when you're setting up your valve train, you might have a pushrod in there and a spring, and you're measuring lift. You know that valve spring flexes right there on the engine stand while you're testing it. But does that happen while the engine is running? And if so, how much power does it lose and what can you do about it? Those are the things we're gonna explore here, all with the help of the guys from Cams. Let me start out by digging a little deeper into the tech of how this all works. Now, the valve spring is what we're really gonna be focusing on here in terms of how much pressure that puts in the system. Now, the other thing we're gonna be looking at is flex in the push rod right here. Note that I've intentionally done my artwork here so that the push rod is not directly in line with the lifter. You can see it's off like this to an angle a bit because that's how it is in a lot of engines, including this big block Ford. And the thing is, when that lifter is moving up and the rocker arm's over here and it's pushing at an angle, that rod can bend. And when it does, it's gonna reduce the lift at the valve because it's gonna take up that motion in here. The other thing that it can do is affect valve duration because as that thing bends, it's not imparting lift at the valve. Therefore, the lift at the valve is happening later and closing sooner, potentially, and we're gonna look at that in this also. Now that we've got all that covered, let's talk about valve springs and sort of how they're measured and how the pressures on them can be determined if they're light or if they're heavy. Let's imagine that this right here was the surface on the cylinder head where that valve spring is seated, right there. And then, I guess I'll draw a valve so that you get the picture of what I'm talking about. And then our spring is here. And then you've got a retainer up here, the thing that has like the little keepers in it and locks and things like that. So what we call installed height is the distance from right here, where the bottom of the spring is, to just to the underside of that retainer. That distance right there is installed height. And the thing is, when you get a spring straight out of the box, it can be really tall like this one right here. But when you install it, it's already been compressed a little bit, even when the valve isn't open. And typically you would see this at to 200 to 100 on a big block. The big block Ford is unusual. It actually has an installed height of 1.880 inches. So we know that's our installed height, and we can measure with a special tool what the pressure is on the spring at that installed height. The initial set of springs that we're going to run has 210 pounds. Now that's often called valve spring seat pressure. The thing is, it's not pressure, it's actually load. You'll get engineering strokes that'll tell you that's not pressure because pressure includes a unit of area, like pounds per square inch. It's actually load, and it is. It's 210 pounds, not PSI. Now the next thing that we're going to look at is, let's say we've got that same spring, but this time, this valve is open down here like this. So therefore, the spring has been compressed. And once again, right here, you've got the underside of the retainer, and right here, you've got where it's sitting on the cylinder head. You can see that it's been squished. Now, let's just say that it's been squished so much that the valve is at its peak lift, or what we call on the nose. That would be the maximum load that that spring is going to see, is when the valve is all the way open. In the case of the first set of springs we're gonna test on this thing, it has 550 pounds. Now let's talk about what we're going to go to. Here's real world examples of the parts that we're going to be using. This is the spring that's in the engine right now, and it runs perfectly. It doesn't float the valves or anything, and we're gonna install this. You can see that this spring is much taller. We're gonna have to squish it in here into that installed height of 1.880, and when we do, I can tell you that that seat load is no longer 210 pounds, it is 350. And when we've got the valve all the way open, the load is now 800 pounds. That is an increase of 45%. Now that's pressure that we don't actually need for this engine to operate properly, but it does answer the question, does adding that much spring pressure and that much drama in rolling the engine around actually affect power? That's what we're gonna get into. But that's not the only thing that we're gonna test. We're also going to look at that pushrod flex that I described, how this thing can become a spring and get all bendy. And to do that, we're gonna run 2 different pushrods with each of our different springs. I've got one pushrod that is an 80,000ths of an inch wall thickness. See, the pushrod's basically a tube. It's hollow, you can see through it. And so the metal is 80,000ths of an inch thick. The stiffer pushrod that I've got is 135 thousandths, so this should have greater resistance to bending. It's also way heavier, but does that matter? These are all the things that we're gonna find out. This is gonna actually be super interesting. It's not something that you see tested very much, if at all. Steve Brule thought of this, and I think it's genius, and I can't wait to learn. We're gonna learn with this engine right here. This is a 514 cubic inch big block Ford. The key that you need to know here is that it does have a solid roller camshaft. Everything that we're testing here really should be reserved for solid rollers as far as the heavy spring pressures, because if you have a flat tappet cam, running way too much pressure like this can wipe out that surface from the lifter to the camshaft. And if you've got a hydraulic camshaft, too much pressure might cause issues with the little plunger and piston and valve that are inside the lifter. So this is solid roller territory, as we love on Engine Masters. All right, I'm gonna go talk to the Steves, and then we'll fire this thing up and find answers to all these crazy questions. All right, this is gonna be an interesting test that came straight from the mind of Brule.
Ooh, that sounds interesting already.
Yeah, the whole valve spring thing. So our initial test with our 514 Ford is going to be with our light spring, which is 210 pounds on the seat and 550 open. And we've also got the thinner wall pushrods in it, right?
85 wall.
So it is 85 wall, which would be 0.085 inches wall thickness on the pushrods.
Baseline us, Steve-O.
Well, that's the other question. Will we see the thinner pushrods start to flex and lose power with the heavy spring?
2 or 3 or 4 questions that can be answered.
It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
One test at a time.
All right, fire it up, Steve.
All right.
We just made our very first test in the hunt to find out if heavy valve springs actually kill power, and also if flimsy pushrods kill power. Right now, we've got the lightest of the 2 valve springs that we're gonna run and the flimsiest of the 2 pushrods, and here are our power numbers. 659.9 pound-feet of torque at 4,500 RPM, and the horsepower is 648.9 up at 6,000 RPM. There's not much left to talk about. That's just is what it is.
It is what it is, and it's good.
So the next thing we're gonna do is run into the dyno cell and rip it apart and put in stiffer push rods. Right now they're 085 wall, and we're gonna put in 135. Ready?
I think it'll surprise you.
I hope so. Look at our stiff pushrod torque number, 660 pound-feet, and the horsepower, 652.6. I sort of desperately hope that the stiff pushrods actually made a difference.
Me too.
Look at the overlay. Stiff pushrods are in black, and flimsy ones are in red.
So it did.
Wow. It really made a difference up here.
You know, when I was looking at some of the data before I walked in, it looks to be about 5 up in that area. I mean, I was a little doubtful initially.
Yeah?
With this amount of spring, if that would be that big of a difference. And I think the real proof in the pudding will be is when we put that 800-pound spring on it.
Sure.
Because if that thinner push rod or weaker push rod is flexing and deflecting and losing lift,
Or
it's going to
breaking.
become more exaggerated with that bigger spring.
Wow, this actually makes me happy.
I know,
It's
me
better
too.
everywhere.
Because I didn't know if we were actually gonna see anything.
No, it's better everywhere.
So I'm really anticipating these results being more radical when we go to the really stiff spring and the flimsy pushrod, which is what we're about to do. Or should I say it's what Troy's about to do, because this is gonna be a lot. Here's our power with the 800-pound heavy springs and the super spaghetti push rods. 658.5 pound-feet of torque and 643.7 horsepower, which seems lower
Seems
than
lower.
it was before.
Only because it is low.
Oh,
Show me it.
let's see.
Have a whole bunch of spring on it.
Oh, look at this. The red lines are the prior test that had the lighter springs and the heavier push rods. The black lines are what we just did with the beefy springs and the flimsy push rods. The thing you can't explain is this.
No, it's...
What if the heavy spring is somehow
Controlling better?
controlling better down here and the push rod's not in distress yet?
Yeah.
And then the push rod starts to go away right here.
Oh.
And it makes more power up there.
What if the pushrod's deflecting and not giving as much lift, raising low end torque?
And duration if it is flexing.
Yeah.
That's a good one. That's way better than mine.
I am getting
That's
smarter
way
after all.
better than mine. You're right. Think of that. That was genius. What Dulcich is saying is that the pushrod's bending, therefore reducing duration in the camshaft, and we know that reducing camshaft duration makes more low-end torque, and that's what's happening. That's genius, Dulcich. I love that when we come up with
Thanks,
excuses that sound plausible.
No, you know, there's actually some merit to that. You know, the proof is going to be when we put the stiff push rod back in it, it should tilt the curve back the other way.
If that's in fact the problem.
Yeah.
But yeah, we lost a lot of power going this way. And to be clear, the reason we believe that we're losing power is because that push rod is flexing, giving up lift,
deflecting.
giving up duration, and just making a mess of the
Or
whole thing.
is it because the spring is heavier and it's harder to turn?
Well, let's put in the heavier pushrod.
Okay, yeah, we're not gonna know really what we're knowing until we throw in the 135 wall push rods, and even then we might not know, but we can come up with excuses because it's what we do. No?
No.
Facts coming up on Engine Masters. Here we go. We just set this up for the final answer about whether valve spring tension has the potential to kill power. We've got our heavy-duty springs in this thing. We've also got our beefy push rods. I'm gonna make Steve fire it up on the dyno, and we're gonna have a look at the power. Here's our power, and actually it looks like we're gonna conclude the stuff that we wanted to see. The torque with the heavy spring and the heavy pushrod is 659, and don't forget the 0.9 pound-feet of torque, and the horsepower is 651.6. Let's look at the overlay of this, and it's gotta be compared to the lighter spring with the stiffer pushrod, which is the best power curve we've seen so far.
Heavy pushrod.
Uh-oh. They're exactly the same. There's a little bit of a something up there, but for all intents and purposes, the light spring and the heavy pushrod and the heavy spring and the heavy pushrod make the same power, the conclusion being that at least in this test, adding 45% more valve spring pressure over the nose does not affect the power curve.
I agree.
My whole interest switched gears as soon as I saw what the better pushrod did, even with the other spring. It was like, okay, I wanted to go into this looking at valve springs. And you said, well, let's throw some pushrods in there too, and let's do that. The guys at Comp loved that idea, with doing both. And like I say, halfway through, I just went, oh my God, this isn't about the valve spring at all. This is about the pushrod.
Well, but still, clearly, the whole thing about, you know, the engine turns over harder with a wrench when it's got heavier springs on it doesn't translate into any kind of a loss.
No, it does not.
Yeah. But the pushrod, you know what we have to see? Let's look at a comparison of either one of these tests with the heavy spring with the light pushrod. Yeah, look at that. This is a comparison in red of the stiff spring and the light pushrod, and black is the stiff spring with the good pushrod. And look at that, massive difference.
Yeah. I would have never caught that, honestly, between us guys. That whole thing about the pushrod deflection causing the camshaft to actually be smaller.
Appear smaller.
And change something at the bottom, I wasn't prepared for that at all.
Yeah, I didn't see that coming either.
It's so repeatable, I'm very confident, and that's what's going on.
Yeah, and the reason Steve's saying that this is repeatable down here where the flimsier pushrod makes more torque is because we saw it with both sets of springs, and it goes back to Dulcich's observation that the flexing pushrod reduces duration.
It does tell me that the other spring is adequate.
Oh, yeah.
The 550-pound spring is adequate for this camshaft because we made the same power, same torque. It was identical. It was the pushrod that was really significant in helping it pick up.
Let's talk about that in particular. We didn't need to add the stiffer valve spring to this, and there are, in fact, downsides to that, because you might be sitting there going, I might as well stack the biggest spring that I can get on my solid roller camshaft. There's no downside. There is. You're going to wear out parts more. It's still going to flex the pushrod, and it's still going to have rocker arm difficulties, like it's more strain on the rocker arm could break.
Yeah.
And the axle on the roller lifter.
I was just going to say the lifters. It's a higher strain on the lifter. So
And the seats. You can pound out the seats if you have a lot of closing load.
The valve seats. So while there are downsides to having too stiff of a spring, the question is there a downside to having too stiff of a pushrod?
I'm not seeing that here.
No, not here. But I think a lot of people have the question, well, the stiffer one is way heavier than the thin wall one. But does it matter over on that side of the rocker arm?
I think it's insignificant over on that side. I mean, that's kind of what we saw. This pushrod is certainly heavier than the 85 wall or the 80 wall.
And I think that's all the notes that I've got. So our final conclusions are run the lightest spring you can that still controls your cam, but if you go too much on the spring, it's not going to have an effect on power, and there's no downside to running the stiffest pushrod you can. And we can also conclude that you really want to have stiff rocker arms and rocker arm studs, or above and beyond that, shaft rockers.
Right. I like the shaft rockers. They're so much faster to adjust.
Yeah, there's a lot of betterness about shaft rockers.
Yeah, certainly is.
Yeah, what's a good test for shaft rockers? Could we actually get something with like 1,100 pounds over the nose and run it on a rocker stud versus a shaft rocker?
You know, when we talk about deflection, this has got a regular stud in it. If this had shaft rockers on it, would it pick up even a little more?
I'm not sure if we'd see that on this engine, but I think we could do it with something more hardcore.
Yeah, certainly.
And more hardcore is what I love. Anytime I can pull it off on Engine Masters. The thing you can't explain is this.
No, it's...
Oh, yeah, I can explain it if you want me to. Of course. Because the spring takes more power to turn the engine?
But heavy springs making more power right here.
I thought you said I was getting smarter.
Can you not snack in the middle of the tape?
Are you chewing?
Oh, God.
He just shoved that beef stick right down his throat, too.
Hello, xin chào tất cả các bạn yêu. Lại là mình đây, và dành video 2 cho các bạn xem. Các bạn ơi, các bạn thấy hay thì hãy like và comment tốt cho kênh của mình nha. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi kênh của mình. Ok luôn các bạn ơi. Chúc các bạn thật nhiều sức khỏe để đón xem nhiều video hay của mình nha. Ok luôn các bạn yêu. Hôm nay mình không làm được video rồi, tại vì quá là ôi trời ơi, đáng tưởng biết.
Sau đó, các bạn đế được đặt nằm ngang trong một dãy sâu chừng 5 tấc trên nền đất tơi xốp để dễ bám chắc hơn. Khi bê lớn, họ tỉa bỏ lá già dưới gốc để cây không bị thủng mất dinh dưỡng. Đặc biệt, theo thời gian, các rãnh trồng sẽ thường biến thành núi cao, còn núi cũ trở thành mương dẫn nước, giúp giữ ẩm tự nhiên nên mía phát triển xanh tốt quanh năm. Thật quá đi.
Hay mới nhỉ?
Bán lại rẻ cho 25 triệu. Mua đâu? 25 triệu. Chịu. 10 triệu không gửi. Ok.
Anh này rất cực kỳ khôn khéo khi đã nghiên cứu và biết trước được môi trường của tay, nên ngay khi bắt chước, gã này đã tìm cách đè đòn Devon, tiếp tục tìm cách thoát tay nhằm khiến Devon thực sự thì thứ mà hắn đang tìm đó chính là sức mạnh của tay Devon. Nhận thấy đối thủ đánh bại trước, Devon lập tức dùng 2 ngón tay khóa chặt không cho đối thủ thoát, và sau khi đối thủ không có ý biết rồi, Devon lập tức túm lấy tay đối thủ và hạ gục dễ dàng. Cũng là đẳng cấp của bàn tay. Quan vừa chọn 13 tuổi, cậu gặp một ống tiền trong miệng để thở, đồng tiền Họ đã chất đầy vào chúng
rơi trình độ rơi thì không vỡ đúng mà
Dạ.
đây trong một trắng nhìn màu trắng sáng kèo nhìn trắng so sánh trắng màu vàng màu trắng này đẹp hơn sáng xưa cũng là đẹp vào
Chà. Nhiều người ngoài kia nói là nhắm mắt yêu luôn. Sao rồi không? Sao? Xin mày đừng lát nữa để tao làm xong con đi ngủ. Mai tao phải đánh giải Olympic. Anh Đặng Tưởng biết giành giải nhất.
Cơm đi em ơi.
Một chuyên gia kinh doanh đã
tiết lộ cách sắn tay áo sơ mi kiểu Mỹ cực kỳ chuyên nghiệp. Đầu tiên, sắn tay áo lên đến giữa cánh tay, sau đó gấp đôi phần vải vừa sắn xuống. Lúc này, phần cổ tay áo có khuy gọi là cuffs sẽ được gấp gọn vào bên trong một cách hoàn hảo, không hề lòi ra ngoài. Chỉ cần sắn một lần như vậy là bạn đã có thể tự tin trong mọi cuộc họp công việc và không lo mất điểm. Ngoài ra, còn có một cách sắn tay áo mang phong cách casual gọi là French roll-up. Bước đầu giống nhau là gấp đôi phần cánh tay trước, nhưng lần này bạn chỉ gấp đến trước phần cổ tay áo, rồi lấy cổ tay áo phủ lên và cài quy lại. Đây là kiểu sắn cực kỳ thời thượng và sành điệu. Một chuyên gia kinh doanh đã tiết
Tại sao các tay đua MotoGP lại chạy về phía gara sau khi xe bị tai nạn? Bạn chắc chắn đã từng thấy những video họ chạy như vậy. Thực ra, đằng sau điều này có một lý do đơn giản. Một tay đua MotoGP có 2 chiếc xe đua, và nếu chiếc xe đầu tiên của anh ấy bị hỏng, anh ấy sẽ chạy đến gara để lấy chiếc xe thứ hai của mình tùy theo tình hình. Tại sao các tay đua MotoGP lại chạy cái đào hố trong sân? Anh đang làm những xe ra vào phần đường. Ban đầu, anh nghĩ đó là từng hàng rào, nhưng rồi phát hiện một phần cát lên. Chỉ cách mặt đất khoảng 15 cm, anh phát hiện một người đây khiến dãy xe rất đẹp. Nhưng khi một chuyên gia xem ảnh, ông lập tức nhận ra đó là một thanh kiếm kim loại trên hoàng bì. Điều đó có nghĩa là thanh kiếm này đã nằm yên dưới lòng đất trong một suốt hơn một thế kỷ. Cái đào hố trong sân, anh ta nghe tiếng xe va vào vật. Với nhiều người, việc thợ mỏ cho chuột ăn có thể mất vệ sinh, nhưng dưới lòng đất sâu hàng trăm mét, loài vật nhỏ bé ấy lại là người bạn của bạn. Trong lúc nghỉ ăn, một con chuột xuất hiện tự nhiên như chủ nhà và được các thợ mỏ chia sẻ cơm rau. Chuột có khứu giác nhạy bén, cảm nhận khí độc hay nguy cơ sập hầm sớm hơn con người. Nếu thấy nó bỏ chạy, đó là tín hiệu phải lập tức rời đi. Với nhiều người, việc thợ mỏ cho chuột ăn có thể mất vệ sinh, nhưng dưới lòng đất sâu hàng trăm mét, loài vật nhỏ bé ấy lại là người bạn của bạn. Trong lúc nghỉ ăn, một con chuột xuất hiện tự nhiên như chủ nhà và được các thợ mỏ chia sẻ cơm rau.
Bị ba cắn vào tay không chủ nhà, tại sao không được dùng lửa để đốt nó? Nếu bạn không muốn tay mình bị tổn thương lần hai, thì tuyệt đối đừng dùng cách đó, bởi vì khi nó cảm thấy đau đớn, nó sẽ cắn chặt hơn nữa. Vậy thì cách đúng phải làm như sau. Bạn xem, chúng ta dùng một chiếc đũa để làm thí nghiệm cho bạn xem. Lúc này nó cắn siết chặt. Bạn thấy đấy, hoàn toàn không thể gỡ ra. Lúc này, bạn chỉ cần chuẩn bị một chai dầu chẳng, mở nắp ra, đây chính là một chai dầu chẳng. Sau đó đổ thẳng vào miệng nó, hoặc đổ vào lỗ mũi của nó, đổ vào miệng trước, đổ như thế này, nó sẽ phản ứng. Thấy chưa? Có phản ứng rồi, khó chịu rồi đúng không? Cứ tiếp tục đổ vào. Đến lúc này, nó không chịu nổi nữa. Bạn thấy không? Nó lập tức nhả ra ngay, bởi vì khứu giác của nó bị kích ứng. Đến lúc này, nó sẽ nhả ra. Bị ba cắn thật, người đàn ông ngạc nhiên khi thanh toán viện phí cho vợ. Chỉ cần trên hóa đơn của bệnh viện có con dấu là bạn có biết không? Ở khoa bồi đều ghi đề, người dân tự chế tạo những chiếc máy bay nhỏ cho riêng mình. Những chiếc cô bé này muốn giành được một chiếc đùi gà miễn phí, nhưng để làm được điều đó, cậu phải dùng đồng hồ đúng chính xác ở dây thứ 10. Cậu bé bắt đầu bấm đồng hồ rồi quay mặt xuống dưới như thể đang cầu nguyện vậy. Sau đó cậu ngẩng lên quan sát và quyết định nhấn nút. Đồng hồ bất ngờ đã dừng ở dây thứ 10. Cậu bé hò reo sung sướng đi nhận phần thưởng. Nhưng điều kỳ lạ là lúc này biểu cảm của những cậu sẽ vui. Và điều sắp xảy ra khiến không ai có thể ngờ trước được. Hóa ra cậu bé này là vua trò chơi vì đã khám phá chiếc đùi gà trong đất rồi. Cậu bé này muốn giành được một chiếc đùi gà miễn phí, nhưng để làm được điều đó, cậu phải dùng đồng hồ đúng chính xác ở. Một vị bác sĩ đã cắt một lớp da mỏng từ cơ thể người chết rồi gửi đến phòng thí nghiệm. Sau đó một nhà khoa học sẽ khiến lớp da mềm dẻo và trở thành collagen. Tiếp theo ông ta sẽ đóng vào những phong tấm da rồi gửi trở lại phòng khám bác sĩ. Tấm da lúc này sẽ được hút trong nước và sau đó vị bác sĩ sẽ phun nó vào nối của những bệnh nhân bị tổn thương hàm. Cơ thể của những bệnh nhân sẽ tự phục hồi nó bằng tế bào sống, biến mô trở thành khứu răng.
Mít ơi là mít. Mà check cho anh cái nguồn đấy xem nào, được vẫn còn chạy không?
No, I don't know. Mấy cái điều
Đấy, cho chạy chốc xem quen không. Xin chào và hẹn gặp lại các bạn nhé. Cảm ơn các bạn đã theo dõi kênh của mình. Thank you các bạn rất nhiều. Ok các bạn.